The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood, disinfectant, and something metallic, maybe the nerves of the people waiting to be called. The air conditioning hummed overhead, ineffectual against the oppressive weight of tension. Maria sat on the narrow wooden bench, hands folded over a manila folder that had grown soft at the edges from months of use. Her knuckles were pale. Outside, a July thunderstorm brewed over Chicago, staining the courthouse windows with slow-moving gray shadows. She adjusted the gray scarf draped around her shoulders, a gift from her daughter, Alma, and tried to steady her breathing. She wasn't new to courtrooms, but this was the first time she was the one being judged. Back home in Mexico, she'd been the one holding people accountable, questioning mayors, unmasking bribes, recording secret deals. Here, she was a woman in a wrinkled blouse, with a folder and an accent thick as molasses, waiting for a judge who hadn't bothered to learn her name. Case number 2814, Reyes vs. Department of Homeland Security. The clerk called out, Maria stood, her legs stiff, and followed her court-appointed translator toward the bench. The translator, a tall, composed woman named Lucia, gave her a small, steady nod. "We'll be okay," Lucia whispered. Her Spanish was perfect, but tinged with a Midwest crispness that made Maria think she'd grown up far from the border. The judge, a man in his 60s with a thinning crown and a reputation for impatience, didn't look up from his monitor as they approached. When he finally raised his eyes, he gave a long blink, as though already exhausted by whatever struggle he anticipated. Then Maria spoke. "Buenos dias, su señoría," she began carefully. And immediately saw it. The judge rolled his eyes. He didn't hide it. It was a brief but unmistakable movement, an involuntary betrayal of what he thought of women like her, brown-skinned, accented, probably illiterate in his mind. Maria felt it like a slap. Lucia didn't translate the greeting. She took a measured breath and simply said, "Good morning, Your Honor." "I hope we can proceed in English," the judge said, peering down his glasses. "This docket is full." Lucia opened her mouth, but Maria gently touched her elbow. "No. We use Spanish," Maria said firmly. "I want every word to be true." The judge gave a tight sigh and motioned for them to begin. The government's attorney, a sharp woman in a dark blazer, launched into her opening, detailing Maria's undocumented entry into the United States, the expired visa, the failure to comply with a removal order issued 2 years ago. Her voice was even, impersonal, the cadence of someone who recited lives from a folder daily. Maria listened to every word as Lucia translated, then cleared her throat. Her statement had been rehearsed dozens of times, but now, standing under fluorescent lights and facing a man who had dismissed her before she'd spoken a full sentence, she faltered. "I came here," Maria began, her voice low but steady, "because staying in Mexico meant dying." Lucia echoed the words in perfect English, her tone unflinching. Maria described the threats, the smashed windows, the burned-out car, the 2 colleagues who had vanished. She explained how, after her exposé aired on a regional network, her life had collapsed in less than a week. How her daughter, then 15, begged her to run. How she crossed the border with her children in the back seat and fear bubbling in her throat. The judge barely looked up. At one point, when Maria stumbled over a complex sentence in Spanish, he sighed audibly. When Lucia translated the part about the journalist union that helped smuggle Maria out, he raised an eyebrow. But nothing softened in his face then, as Maria was describing the night she received a phone call with only the sound of her dog yelping on the other end. The same night her front door was spray-painted with the word, Traidora. The judge interrupted, "I've heard enough for now. We'll reconvene with evidence from both sides." Maria froze. She hadn't even finished explaining her asylum claim. "Your Honor," Lucia said, a slight tremble in her voice. "May I say something on behalf of the respondent?" He glanced at her, then at his docket. Briefly. Lucia took a step forward, voice clear, accent gone. "I think you should know who she is. You might not recognize her now, but in Mexico, she was Maria del Sol Reyes, investigative reporter, 3-time recipient of the Mexican Press Freedom Medal. Her work helped dismantle a major political cartel. There are articles, interviews, videos. She's not just seeking protection, Your Honor. She's someone whose voice saved lives. And now she's here, being dismissed because she has an accent." The courtroom went still. Even the clerk looked up from his computer. The government attorney blinked, clearly thrown off. The judge's pen paused mid-air. Lucia held the silence. Like a shield, for the first time, the judge looked at Maria. Really looked, and then he asked the question she hadn't dared hope for, "Is that true?" Maria nodded. "See," she whispered. "It is." The judge asked no further questions. He simply nodded once and recessed the hearing until after lunch, his demeanor now opaque, less dismissive, but not yet open. Maria walked out of the courtroom like someone awakening from a near drowning. Her legs wobbled as if she'd just stepped off a rocking boat. Lucia stayed close, guiding her down the hallway lined with government-issue beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Outside the courtroom, a young paralegal leaned against the wall, checking her phone. She looked up as they passed, eyes flicking over Maria with something new, not pity, but recognition. She knows, Maria murmured. Lucia nodded. All will soon. In the waiting area, Maria sat and opened her manila folder again, not because she needed to, she knew every document inside, but because it gave her hands something to do. The folder held photographs of protests, newspaper clippings, formal letters from international organizations. But it also held less public things, a drawing Alma made when she was 9, the last note her mother wrote before she died, a torn piece of paper with the names of journalists who'd vanished in Sonora, written in Maria's rushed, anxious scrawl. Lucia sat beside her, drinking from a water bottle. You did well, she said, I couldn't even finish my story. You said enough? He's rattled. Maria exhaled. That's not what I want. I want fairness. Not fear. Lucia looked at her for a long second, then nodded. Let's give him both. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. A second translator, one Maria didn't recognize, had been brought in and was seated at the back, likely as a precaution or backup. The government attorney now had a printed copy of Maria's profile from a Mexican journalism site. She wasn't hiding behind legalese anymore. Her eyes, though still composed, betrayed unease. The judge began, I've reviewed the preliminary documents submitted, and I've been briefed on new information provided this morning. Ms. Reyes, your background as a journalist of public significance has been noted. Lucia translated without inflection, but Maria caught the subtle shift in the judge's tone. Not warm. Not apologetic. But less sharp-edged. Less certain. I'll allow the submission of supplemental evidence, he continued. Press materials, human rights correspondence, any professional recognitions. I'll also permit the respondent to submit a sworn declaration about threats she received related to her journalistic work. Maria inclined her head, trying to hide the tremor in her lip. Thank you, Your Honor. He nodded briskly, as if afraid of letting too much empathy leak through. The rest of the hearing moved quickly. The government attorney asked technical questions. When did she first cross? Why didn't she seek asylum sooner? What documentation did she have of the threats? Maria answered through Lucia, her voice gaining strength with each passing minute. She described the night they fled, how Alma clutched her baby brother's hand as they crossed into Texas. How they lived in shelters and on borrowed couches for over a year. How she worked cleaning offices at night while her children went to school. Every answer made her less of a file and more of a person. By mid-afternoon, the judge announced a continuation. The full merits hearing would be scheduled within the next 90 days. He requested formal submissions from both sides and urged all involved to treat the case with the gravity it now clearly merits. As Maria stepped out of the courtroom, the rain had finally broken. Chicago's skyline loomed through wet glass windows, and the street below glistened with puddles reflecting neon signs. She felt something unfamiliar, not victory, but momentum. Lucia held the door open for her. That was the hardest part, she said. No, Maria replied. The hardest part was losing my voice. Today, I got it back. They walked out into the lobby, where Alma waited with her little brother, Mateo. The moment Maria saw them, her knees nearly buckled. Alma rushed to hug her. ¿Cómo fue? Alma whispered. Maria clutched her daughter. Oye, hija, el juez me miró de verdad. Lucia stepped back, giving them space. Her phone buzzed, an email from a journalist in Mexico. Word had spread. Maria hadn't won her case yet, but the world had started listening. The next morning, the apartment smelled of warm tortillas and instant coffee. The small two-bedroom unit in Little Village, with its mismatched furniture and faded curtains, had never felt more like home. Maria stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping quesadillas while Mateo played with plastic cars on the linoleum floor. Alma sat at the table, books spread out, headphones around her neck. She hadn't touched her cereal. You didn't sleep, Maria said gently. Alma looked up, dark circles shadowing her eyes. I was reading your articles again. From before? The ones you wrote about the police commissioner. Maria stopped flipping and turned off the stove. She walked to the table, sitting across from her daughter. You shouldn't keep revisiting that. It's dangerous, she said, but it's who you are. Maria looked at Alma, 17 now, fierce and too aware for her age. The girl who once asked if asylum meant they would live in a castle. The girl who now translated school notices for neighbors and carried pepper spray in her bag. I'm not just that, Maria said quietly. I'm also your mother. And I'm tired. Not just of running. Of being reduced to the things that nearly destroyed me. Alma frowned. But you didn't tell the whole story in court. They don't know about what happened after you left the paper. About the letter, Maria's breath caught. That letter never made it to court for a reason. But it's proof. It has names. Exactly, Maria said. Names that could get people hurt. Including us. A silence settled between them. Mateo hummed to himself, oblivious, lining up his cars in a perfect row. Then Alma leaned forward. They need to see all of you. Not just the part they can Google. Maria studied her daughter. Her heart aching. Alma had grown up on the move, from Veracruz to Nogales to Houston to Chicago. She carried their trauma like a second skin. I'm scared, Mija, Maria said finally. If we push too hard, we already crossed deserts for this. Hid in storage rooms. Slept in cars. You taught me to fight. Don't stop now. Maria reached across the table, squeezed Alma's hand. Okay. We'll do it your way. Later. That day, they visited a legal aid nonprofit downtown. The office was cramped but welcoming, its walls covered in posters about tenant rights, fair wages, and immigration protections. A volunteer ushered them to a back room where an attorney, named Denise, waited. She was young, African-American, with tight curls pulled into a bun and an air of focused compassion. Lucia had referred them. As Maria recounted the courtroom hearing, Denise took notes quickly but respectfully, occasionally nodding. And you believe your past work is the reason for the threats? She asked. Yes, Maria replied. But it's more than belief. There's a pattern. Alma pulled a folded sheet from her bag, the letter. It was typed in all caps, and signed, the language blunt and chilling. You think you escaped? We still know where to find you. Denise read it, eyes narrowing. Did this come to your Chicago address? Maria hesitated. Yes. Last spring. We didn't tell anyone. We moved apartments instead. Any idea who sent it? No. But the style, the tone, it's like the warnings my editor used to get. Denise tapped her pen against her notebook. We'll have to submit this. It could strengthen your claim, prove ongoing risk even here. But it also raises the stakes. Maria met her eyes. I know. Denise leaned back. You'll need letters. From people who worked with you. From organizations who can verify your role. Any documentation showing your reporting had consequences, good or bad. Maria nodded. I can do that. They left with a thick packet of forms, a list of documents to collect, and a follow-up date for filing the updated submission. Outside, the summer wind whipped through the loop, tossing Alma's hair into her face. Are you sure about the letter? Maria asked as they walked. I'm sure we don't hide anymore, Alma said. Maria looked up at the skyline, tall, angular, unrelenting. In Mexico, she'd taken down people who seemed untouchable. In America, she had been invisible. Now, for better or worse, she was becoming real again. 2 weeks passed in a blur of calls, emails, and digging through old contacts. Maria spent long nights at the dining table with Alma, composing messages in careful Spanish and hesitant English. Some went unanswered. Some bounced back. But others, to her surprise, opened doors she thought had long been shut. One morning, while folding laundry, Maria received an email from Eduardo Serrano, her former editor at El Horizonte de Sonora. He had vanished the year after she fled. Disappeared from the media landscape without explanation. Now he was in Madrid, teaching journalism at a university. Maria, he wrote, when I saw your name in the news again, I cried. I thought they got you. Of course I'll write a letter. The world should know what you risked. The words hit her like a wave. That night, she printed Eduardo's letter and placed it carefully in a folder alongside new statements from human rights advocates, an international journalism coalition, and a Mexican senator who had once quoted her investigation during a televised debate. Each letter told a piece of her story, her courage, the retaliation, the systemic rot she helped expose. And each one chipped away at the lie she'd carried. In silence, that what she did hadn't mattered. On a humid afternoon, she and Alma took the bus back to the legal aid office. Maria wore her best blouse, sky blue, ironed flat. Alma clutched the folder like it held a heart. Denise greeted them with a tired but genuine smile. I was hoping you'd bring good news. They sat across from her, and Alma laid the folder on the desk. Maria spoke first. There's more coming. But this is what we have now. Denise flipped through the letters, skimming each one carefully. Her eyes paused on Eduardo's signature. This is gold, she murmured. She kept reading. When she finished, she leaned back, tapping the desk. This completely reframes your case. You weren't just targeted, you were targeted because of your public work. That's key for asylum. Maria exhaled, her shoulders sagging. But, Denise added, we have to be careful. These letters validate you, yes. But they also alert your enemies, especially if your name keeps circulating online. Have you had any new threats since that letter arrived? Maria shook her head. No. Not directly. We'll request that your address remain sealed in court filings. And I'll ask the judge for protective measures. But be prepared, this is no longer a quiet case. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in the living room, watching the streetlights flicker on West 25th Street. A siren wailed in the distance, and somewhere nearby, a dog barked. She sipped lukewarm tea, trying not to wake the children. In the silence, she pulled out a notebook and wrote in slow, careful cursive, "I came here not as a victim, but as a survivor. I crossed because truth has a cost, and I paid it. I stayed because my children deserve more than silence and shadows." Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, not from fear, but from remembering. Her pen paused above the paper, then, without thinking, she flipped to a fresh page and began writing a new article, the first in nearly 4 years. Not for a newspaper. Not for an audience. Just for herself. It began, in Chicago, a woman who once shouted truth into microphones now whispers her story into courtrooms, and still, it echoes. The next morning, Maria found a text from Lucia. Judge Cortland requested a special review. He wants all updated materials in advance of the hearing. He's paying attention now. Maria stared at the message, heart racing. The judge, who had once rolled his eyes, was reading. The Saturday before the hearing, the doorbell rang just after noon. Maria wasn't expecting anyone. She peeked through the peephole, tension instantly knotting in her stomach. 2 men stood in the hallway, dressed in business casual clothes. One holding a small notepad, the other a folded copy of Law Opinion Chicago. She opened the door only a crack. "Ms. Reyes," the man with the notepad asked. His accent was American, but his Spanish was careful, respectful. "Quien pregunta?" "My name is Daniel Cordova. I'm with the Chicago Bureau of International Press Safety. This is my colleague, Luis Pena. We're here because of your case." Maria stiffened. "I didn't ask for press." "We're not reporters," Luis added in Spanish. "We're an NGO. We monitor journalist asylum claims. Your story came to us through partners in Madrid and Mexico City." Maria hesitated, then opened the door fully. "You'd better come in." At the kitchen table, they explained their presence. They weren't with the government. They didn't work for lawyers. But they documented journalist persecution cases and lobbied for systemic reform, especially for Latin American reporters seeking protection in the U.S. Daniel unfolded the newspaper. The front-page article was in Spanish, "From Sonora to Chicago. The woman who dared to speak." A photo of Maria from 5 years ago stared back, mouth mid-sentence, microphone in hand, fire in her eyes. The headline sent a chill through her. "Where did this come from?" she asked, voice tight. Luis leaned forward. "Someone republished old interviews after your name surfaced in immigration records. It's gaining traction, mostly sympathetic coverage, but some pushback from less friendly corners." Maria looked down at her trembling hands. "This puts my kids at risk." "We know," Daniel said. "We're offering support. Security consultation. Help communicating with the court discreetly. And, if you want, we can submit an amicus brief, a third-party letter to the judge, attesting to your public danger and value." Maria sat back. She felt dizzy. It was one thing to fight for visibility in a courtroom. It was another to realize the world had begun watching, that the safety she'd fought for might be shifting under her again. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Daniel replied. He handed her a card. "But do it soon. These things move fast, especially when people don't want them to." That night, Alma was furious. "They printed your name without asking? Isn't that illegal?" Maria rubbed her temples. "It depends. Old interviews are public. It's not illegal. Just dangerous." Alma paced. "So now what? We hide again?" Maria shook her head. "No. But we're careful." She looked at Alma, then Mateo, who was asleep on the couch, a half-eaten granola bar still in his hand. "I didn't come here to live in fear," she said. "But that doesn't mean I act like it's not real." Alma sat beside her. "Do you want me to stop looking up articles? Stop telling people at school?" "No," Maria said softly. "Just tell the truth wisely. Not loudly." 2 days later, Maria met with Denise to prepare for the hearing. The lawyer had already received copies of the press coverage. She wasn't surprised. "This can help us," Denise said. "It proves your past wasn't some exaggeration. It shows you're still a target. But it also makes me one." Denise didn't disagree. They practiced her testimony, rehearsed timelines, clarified legal terms. Maria's statement had to be precise, emotional but not dramatic, credible but not cautious. Truth wasn't enough, it had to be legally compelling. When they finished, Maria asked, "Do you think the judge will believe me?" Denise smiled faintly. "He already does. He just needs the system to give him permission to say it." Back home, Maria sat at her desk and began writing again. This time, it was a letter. To the judge, she wrote in Spanish, then translated it herself, line by line, refining each phrase. It wasn't official evidence. It wasn't even required. But it was hers, her voice, in her own rhythm. At the end, she wrote, "You may not have seen me clearly when I entered your courtroom. But I ask that you see me now, not just as a petitioner, not just as a voice from another country, but as a woman who told the truth and paid for it. And who still believes it matters." She printed it, folded it, and sealed it in a manila envelope addressed simply, Honorable M. Cortland Federal Immigration Court, Chicago, Illinois. The morning of the hearing, Chicago was wrapped in a thick, gray fog. From the bus window, Maria watched the city blur past, streetlights glowing faintly like lanterns in a dream. Alma sat beside her, silent, headphones in but music off. Mateo had stayed home with a neighbor, too young for the courtroom's wait. Maria clutched the envelope she'd written for Judge Cortland, fingers tracing its edges like a rosary. Denise had already submitted the formal documentation. The letter, she told Maria, was personal, a final offering. Not required, not expected. But sometimes, the words that weren't evidence carried the most weight. They passed through security, climbed 2 flights of stairs, and entered the now familiar waiting room. Lucia was already there, sipping coffee from a paper cup. She greeted Maria with a soft smile. "Ready?" "As much as I'll ever be," Maria replied. When the courtroom door opened and the clerk called her name, Maria stood taller than she felt. The fluorescent lights buzzed as they entered. Judge Cortland was already seated, shuffling papers. His robe was slightly askew, and he wore reading glasses low on his nose. "Let's begin," he said without preamble. The hearing started with formalities: Maria's identity, her attorney of record, confirmation of filings received. The government's lawyer, a different one this time, younger and visibly tense, acknowledged the new submissions and raised no objections. Then came the heart of the matter. "Ms. Reyes," the judge said, glancing at the thick folder in front of him, "you may now testify in support of your asylum claim." Lucia moved closer. Maria adjusted her scarf. And then she began. She spoke of Sonora. Of deadlines and threats, of stories buried and stories published. Of colleagues who vanished without a trace. Of Alma's face the night they fled, and Mateo's cries in the desert. Through Lucia's calm voice, Maria told the courtroom that truth was her job, but fear had become her shadow. That she didn't want revenge or fame, just the chance to live where telling the truth wasn't a death sentence. Denise guided her with questions. The judge occasionally interrupted for clarification. But mostly, he listened. Fully. No eye rolls. No impatience. Just a man trying to make sense of a life that defied paperwork. Then came the government's cross-examination. "Ms. Reyes," the attorney began, "do you have physical evidence of the threats you received while in the United States?" Maria shook her head. "Only the letter I submitted." "No police reports?" "I didn't feel safe filing one. I've seen what happens when people report threats and are ignored." The lawyer pressed on, about dates, about why she hadn't applied sooner, about whether she could relocate within Mexico. Maria answered calmly, sometimes through tears. At one point, when asked why she didn't return home when her visa expired, she looked the lawyer in the eye and said, "Because my children deserve to live." There was no more to say after that. The judge called a short recess. Maria stepped into the hallway, her breath shallow. Alma handed her a bottle of water. Lucia touched her shoulder. "You did beautifully." "I feel like I'm unraveling," Maria whispered. "That means you told the truth." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Cortland looked tired, not bored, but burdened. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before speaking. "I'm not ruling today," he said. "But I want the record to reflect something." Maria's heart thumped. This case illustrates what our system often misses: the complexity of human stories behind immigration files. Ms. Reyes is not simply a petitioner. She is a public figure who risked her life for truth. The threats she faced are not hypothetical. They are documented, repeated, and credible. He paused. "I have received a personal letter from Ms. Reyes. I don't normally include such documents in my consideration, but I've read it. And I believe it speaks to her intent, her history, and her humanity." Maria's breath caught. Alma squeezed her hand. "I will issue my decision in writing within the statutory timeframe. Until then, Ms. Reyes, you and your children remain under the court's protection." The gavel didn't slam. It rested gently. The room emptied slowly. When Maria stood, her knees felt like water. But she walked out upright, flanked by her daughter, her translator, and the knowledge that, win or lose, she had finally been heard. Outside, the fog had lifted. The city shimmered beneath a pale sun. Maria looked up at the courthouse's stone facade. It no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a door. The days after the hearing stretched out like slow-moving freight trains, loud in their passing and heavy with cargo. Maria returned to work cleaning offices overnight, not because she had to that week, but because she needed the rhythm. Sweeping fluorescent-lit hallways, emptying bins of shredded documents, and wiping coffee rings off corporate desks grounded her in something she could control. She had done her part. Now it was the system's turn. Each day, Alma checked the mailbox before school. Each night, Maria refreshed the immigration court portal, staring at the same line, decision pending. In their apartment, normal life wavered between two worlds. The one they lived in, and the one they hoped was coming. One evening, Alma came home late from school. Her face was drawn, her backpack hanging low. What happened? Maria asked. Alma dropped into a chair. Mr. Levin made me stay after class. Someone posted one of your old articles on a school forum, the one about the cartel's fake rehab centers. Kids were commenting. Calling you a liar. Some said you made it all up to get asylum. Maria felt her heart thud. What did you say? I said you exposed corruption that nobody else dared to. That those people disappeared because they told the truth. That you didn't come here to be famous. You came here so we could live. Maria knelt beside her. I'm sorry, Mija. I didn't want this to follow you. It's okay, Alma said. Her eyes burned. I just wish people could see past your accent. Past the headline. Maria kissed her forehead. They will. One at a time. Later that week, Lucia stopped by with a box of pan dulce and a flash drive. I thought you might want this, she said, handing over the small device. It's a backup of your old interviews. Your voice. Your footage. Just in case. Maria turned the flash drive in her fingers. I'm not sure I can listen to myself back then. Maybe not now. But maybe later, when it hurts less. They sat at the table, breaking conscious in silence. Lucia eventually asked, if you win, what will you do? Maria thought for a moment. Maybe I'll teach. Community journalism. Something small. Local. Lucia smiled. You won't stay small for long. Denise called the following Monday. No decision yet, but the court had contacted her office, a sign that Judge Cortland was drafting something. A procedural step, Denise said. But it felt like a tremor. Alma began sleeping with her phone next to her pillow. Maria stopped cooking anything that took longer than 10 minutes. They couldn't plan, not fully. Not yet. Mateo, still young enough to float above the storm, drew pictures at the kitchen table, a tall building, stick figures smiling, one with long hair and a microphone in hand. Es2, Mama, he said proudly. En la tele. Maria smiled. I don't need to be on TV, Corazon. He nodded, unconvinced. But you're still a hero. One night, the neighbors hosted a cookout in the courtyard. Maria didn't feel like going, not with the tension pulling at her chest like wire. But Alma insisted. So she went. The evening air was soft and warm. Strings of yellow light swayed between fire escapes. Music played low from a speaker. She stood at the grill, helping flip tortillas, when a woman tapped her shoulder. I saw your name in the news, she said in accented English. You wrote about disappearances in Sonora, right? Maria's spine stiffened. She turned slowly. The woman extended her hand. My cousin vanished in Hermosillo. We still don't know what happened. Thank you for trying. Maria took her hand. For the first time since leaving Mexico, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, belonging. Late that night, as the city quieted and the wind brushed softly through cracked windows, Maria sat alone. With her laptop. She opened a blank document. Not for court. Not for evidence. Just for herself. She began typing a headline. After silence, the cost of telling the truth. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, then she started to write, not to survive, but to remember. It arrived on a Thursday morning, a slim white envelope, stamped with the seal of the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Alma spotted it first, peeking out from the metal mailbox in the lobby. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a moment, frozen, before pulling it out with trembling hands. She walked back upstairs slowly, the envelope gripped like a live wire. When Maria saw her daughter's face, she knew. No one spoke as Alma handed it over. Maria sat at the kitchen table. The envelope was light, too light for all the weight it carried. She stared at her name in typed letters, Maria Del Sol Reyes. The stamp in the top corner bore the court's return address, not handwritten, not personalized. Official. Cold. Lucia had warned her that most decisions were brief. A paragraph. Maybe two. She had said not to expect emotion, only outcome. Maria slid her finger under the seal. She pulled the folded letter free. Her eyes scanned the page, line after line of government phrasing, until she found it. The court finds the respondent's testimony credible, consistent, and supported by substantial corroborating evidence. As such, the respondent's application for asylum is hereby granted. For a moment, she didn't move. She didn't speak. Then Alma's voice, barely a whisper, is that? Maria nodded, breath caught in her chest. Yes. Alma let out a cry that broke into a laugh. She fell into her mother's arms, and together they wept, deep, shaking sobs that pulled years of fear up from their bones and released it into the small kitchen air. Later that day, Lucia arrived, out of breath and still in her work clothes. When Maria opened the door, Lucia didn't wait for words. She pulled Maria into a fierce hug, then handed over a small paper bag. Pan dulce, she said. Victory sugar. Maria laughed for the first time in days. They sat together, the letter on the table between them. I never thought I'd feel safe again, Maria admitted quietly. You're not just safe, Lucia said. You're seen. In the days that followed, the world shifted in subtle, irreversible ways. The court decision gave her a formal status, a shield. She could apply for permanent residency in time. She could work legally, travel within the U.S., even reapply to have her Mexican press credentials restored abroad if she ever dared return. But more than any legal right, it gave her something else. Voice. Denise called 2 days later. I wanted to say congratulations in person, she said. But mostly, I wanted to tell you, your case changed something here. The judge cited your public role in his internal report. They don't always do that. What does that mean? It means your case will be read by others. Internally. Quietly. But it might help someone else down the line. Maybe another journalist. Maybe another mother. Maria closed her eyes. Then it was worth it. 1 week later, Maria was invited to speak at a local journalism school. Just 15 minutes. A panel on truth-telling and survival. She nearly said no, but Alma insisted. You don't have to shout, Alma said. Just speak the way you do when you tell me bedtime stories. People will listen. Maria stood behind the podium in a borrowed blazer, the auditorium no more than half full. Her notes were brief. Her hands shook, but when she opened her mouth, her voice didn't. She spoke of deadlines chased and sources hidden, of ink that risked blood, of crossing borders not for dreams, but to stay alive. She told them about courtrooms and silence and how a judge who couldn't pronounce her name learned to see her. When she finished, there was no applause at first, only stillness, then hands clapping. Slowly. Then faster. A student raised her hand. Are you still afraid? Maria thought for a moment. Sometimes, she said. But I'm also free. That night, Alma found her mother asleep on the couch, a Spanish news article open on her laptop. Maria's head rested on a notebook. Its cover was blank, inside were pages filled with new headlines. 3 weeks after the court's decision, Maria's name appeared again, this time in the Chicago Tribune, under a headline that made her go still when she saw it. From threats to truth, former Mexican journalist finds asylum, voice in Chicago. The article was respectful, careful, and factual. It referenced her court case, her history as an investigative reporter in Sonora, and her new role as a speaker at immigrant advocacy forums. It mentioned Alma, but not by name, and omitted their address and workplace. The writer had done their homework. Still, seeing her story in English, not her native tongue, was disorienting. She read it 3 times. Alma read it aloud once, with pride barely contained behind each word. Maria del Sol Reyes risked her life to expose corruption at the highest levels of her home state. Now, with asylum granted, she's rebuilding quietly and powerfully in Chicago. Maria listened, her eyes on the street below. You're public again, Alma said softly. I was never private, Maria replied. Just hidden. In the days that followed, new emails trickled in. From journalists back in Mexico, from advocacy groups in Los Angeles and New York, even from a small high school in Iowa that wanted her to speak via video about courage and truth-telling. Point 1 came from someone she hadn't heard from in almost a decade, Adriana, a former intern at the newspaper where Maria had once led investigations. ****, I saw your story, Adriana wrote. You gave me my start. Just wanted to say, I never forgot what you taught me. Never be louder than your facts, and never silence yourself to be safe. I'm a reporter in Oaxaca now. Thank you. Maria cried when she read that one. Because it reminded her that survival wasn't just about making it. It was about legacy. And sometimes, your words continued to speak long after you had stopped writing. Meanwhile, life resumed its ordinary rhythms. Maria returned to work at the cleaning service, now as a supervisor. She helped new arrivals understand their contracts, advocated for safer night shifts, and translated notices when management ignored Spanish-speaking employees. At night, she worked on a manuscript, a collection of essays and recollections. Alma helped with edits. Sometimes they argued over word choice. Sometimes they cried over memories too sharp to dull. The working title, Whispers in a Loud Country. Then came the call that surprised her most. It was Lucia. The National Immigrant Women's Coalition is giving you an award, she said. They want to fly you to Washington in November. Maria blinked. Me? You? I'm not famous. No, Lucia said. But you're brave. And visible. And that matters. Maria hesitated. I don't know if I can stand on a stage again. Then stand behind a podium, Lucia said with a laugh. Same thing. Just with more lights. The invitation stirred old fears. Visibility had nearly cost her everything once. But it also saved her in the end. That weekend, Maria sat with Alma in the courtyard below their apartment, where string lights hung between the balconies. Children played with chalk on the sidewalk. The air smelled faintly of corn and grilled meat. Alma asked, "Do you miss Sonora?" Maria looked up at the fading pink sky. "I miss the air. The sunsets. The music on Sundays. But not the fear." "Would you ever go back?" Maria didn't answer at first. "I don't know. Maybe someday. Not to stay. But to say goodbye." They sat in silence, then Maria added, "For now, I have too much to build here." The next morning, she received a package in the mail. Inside was a single item, a microphone. Not a fancy one. Just a modest handheld recorder with a note, "For your next story. Keep telling them. E." She didn't need to wonder who had sent it. She placed it on her desk beside her manuscript, took a breath, and pressed record. Her voice, steady, accented, unmistakably hers, filled the room. "This is Maria del Sol Reyes. And this is what freedom sounds like." The hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C. was cavernous, high ceilings, golden chandeliers, and round tables covered in white cloths and polished silverware. The kind of place Maria had once believed belonged to other people. She stood just off stage, adjusting the collar of her dark blue blazer, trying to ignore the rapid beat of her heart. From behind the velvet curtain, she could hear the keynote speaker finishing. Applause echoed around the room. Then came a pause, followed by the MC's voice. "Tonight, we honor a woman who has risked everything not once, but over and over, in pursuit of truth and safety, and who reminds us that courage can be both quiet and unshakable. Please welcome the recipient of the National Immigrant Women's Voice Award, Maria del Sol Reyes." The applause grew louder. Maria blinked into the lights, then stepped forward. For a split second, she froze. The room seemed endless. Rows of eyes turned toward her. Somewhere near the front, Alma sat with Lucia and Denise, beaming. Maria could just make out Alma mouthing, "You've got this." She stepped up to the podium, her speech folded neatly in her hand. She didn't read it. Instead, she looked out at the sea of faces, strangers, allies, survivors, and began in her own rhythm. "In my country," she said, "I was told that truth was sacred. And I believed that. I believed it so deeply that I thought it would protect me." Her voice was steady, her accent thick and unapologetic, but truth didn't shield me. It put me in danger. It forced me to run. And when I arrived here, in a land of laws and liberty, I thought truth would be enough." She paused, but truth needed proof. It needed letters, documents, courtrooms, and a translator to carry it in her voice when mine was dismissed. The room was silent. "Tonight, I stand here not just as someone who survived. I stand as someone who was underestimated, misheard, nearly forgotten. And yet, I was never invisible. I was only unseen." She looked down for a moment. Then back. Up. "I accept this award not for what I wrote years ago, but for what I'm writing now. For the stories we carry every day in our silence, and for every woman who crosses borders with more truth than luggage." The room erupted in applause. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she didn't look away. She stepped down from the stage and into the arms of her daughter, who whispered, "You were perfect." Maria whispered back, "I was honest." Later that night, back in the quiet of the hotel room, Maria stood barefoot on the carpet, still holding the plaque in her hands. The television was off. The windows showed a glowing view of the Washington skyline. Alma curled up in the bed, scrolling through photos. "You're all over Twitter now," she said. "Someone said your speech gave them chills." Maria laughed softly. "I gave myself chills." They both laughed. Then silence. Then Alma asked the question Maria had been waiting for, "What now?" Maria thought about it. "I want to publish the book." Alma sat up. "You're serious?" "I've been writing it long enough. It's time." She walked to her suitcase, pulled out the manuscript. "But I want to change the title." "To what?" Maria smiled. The judge rolled his eyes at my accent. Alma grinned. "Perfect." 2 weeks later, Maria met with a small independent publisher based in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. The editor, a young woman whose parents had also immigrated from Mexico, read her manuscript twice. "It's raw," she said. "But powerful." Maria nodded. "So was my life." The deal was modest, but real. Her words would find shelves. On the train ride home, Maria opened her notebook and began writing the introduction. "I used to think survival was the end of the story. That once you made it, the rest would be quiet. But I was wrong. Survival is only the prologue. What comes next is the real story, the one you get to write with your own voice, in your own name." She looked out the window, at the city that had once been a blur of unknowns, now mapped with memories, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in her life, she felt like its author. The first time Alma stepped up to a microphone, it wasn't planned. It was at a local community forum in Little Village, hosted by a coalition of youth organizers focused on immigration justice. The panel was nearly over when the moderator asked if anyone in the audience wanted to share a personal story. Alma looked at Maria. Maria nodded. A subtle encouragement. A permission she didn't need, but still sought. Alma stood up. She walked slowly to the front, hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie. The microphone wobbled as she adjusted it. She took a breath, eyes scanning the modest crowd of neighbors, students, and organizers. My name is Alma Reyes, she said. My mom's name is Maria del Sol Reyes. You may know her story. A few people nodded. I want to tell you mine. She spoke of moving apartments 5 times in 4 years. Of waking up in the middle of the night to whisper arguments about legal papers. Of translating for her mother at grocery stores, clinics, banks, not because she had to, but because she was the only one they'd listen to. She spoke of the courtroom, of the judge's eye roll, of the day she realized how much power people gave to accents. She said, I used to be ashamed of how we spoke. Of how people slowed down their English for us. Or ignored us completely. But then I realized, my mother wasn't speaking badly. She was just speaking bravely, in a language not made for her. Silence fell over the room. Alma stepped back from the mic, face flushed, hands shaking. The applause was soft at first. Then steady. Then standing. Maria sat in the back row, hand over her mouth. Her heart ached in the best way. Her daughter, once afraid to say her own name too loudly in public, had found her voice. And used it. In the weeks that followed, Alma was invited to more panels. Schools. Podcasts. Even a radio segment in Spanish. She didn't say yes to everything. She chose carefully, spaces that valued nuance over noise. Maria watched with a mix of awe and worry. She recognized the pull of visibility, the way it could feel like oxygen. But she also knew its price. One night, over tea, she asked, Are you okay with this, Hija? Really okay? Alma thought for a moment. I think so. I'm not trying to be famous. I just want people to know we're more than just a case file. Maria smiled. That's how it starts. Meanwhile, Maria's own book neared completion. The editor sent back final layout drafts. A publication date was set. Late spring. The cover was simple, her name in bold white letters against a dark red background, with the title beneath. The judge rolled his eyes at my accent. Denise wrote the foreword. Lucia translated key passages into Spanish for the bilingual edition. Alma chose the back cover quote, Truth is not louder in English, just easier to ignore. One evening, they received a letter forwarded through the publisher, a handwritten note from a retired judge in Texas. Ms. Reyes, I read about your case. I am ashamed to admit I once rolled my eyes at someone who reminded me of you. I didn't know their story. I never gave them the chance to tell it. I've carried that moment for years. Your courage forced me to confront it. Thank you. RL. Maria read it twice, then folded it carefully. Not all judges listen late, she told Alma. But some still learn. The apartment grew quieter in the early months of the new year. Mateo was now in first grade, obsessed with planets and drawing rocket ships. Alma had started applying to colleges, quietly, seriously, focusing on programs that blended journalism and law. Maria found herself with time again. Time to write. To rest. To remember. She knew there was still more to come, book talks, interviews, maybe even a second project, but she also knew that this moment, right now, was hers, safe, seen, home. Spring came late to Chicago that year, but when it arrived, it did so with unexpected warmth, soft sun filtering through budding trees, the scent of thawed earth in the air. Maria stood in front of a local bookstore window on Milwaukee Avenue. Her breath catching as she saw her name printed on a poster for the very first time. Author event, Maria del Sol Reyes reading from her debut memoir. Followed by Q&A Saturday, 3 p.m. bilingual event. Alma took a picture with her phone and laughed. They spelled everything right. That's a good sign. Inside, the store was already setting up, folding chairs, a microphone stand, a stack of books arranged neatly on a table near the register. The cover looked surreal in person, her name embossed in quiet authority, the title bold and unflinching. Maria felt a strange calm, not nerves, not fear, just the steady weight of finally standing still. The event drew a modest but meaningful crowd. Neighbors, activists, fellow immigrants, a few journalists who had followed her case. Denise came. Lucia sat near the front. Even Daniel Cordova from the NGO showed up with a quiet nod of respect. Maria read 2 short excerpts. One from her early years in Sonora, describing her first confrontation with censorship. The other from her court testimony, the moment she spoke the words, because my children deserve to live. She looked up after reading, expecting polite silence, but instead, the room applauded softly, not loudly, not for show. Just enough to let her know they'd been listening. In the Q&A, someone asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back to Mexico?" Maria paused. "I think about it all the time. Not to stay, maybe. But to visit. To walk the street where I started. To thank the land that shaped me, even if it couldn't protect me." She let that sit a moment, then added, "But for now, I'm still writing the Chicago chapter." After the event, a small girl approached her with her mother. The girl held a notebook. "Can you sign it?" she asked shyly. "I want to be a writer." Maria knelt down, took the notebook, and wrote, "Your voice is already strong. Let it grow." Maria's girl smiled. Her mother mouthed, "Gracias," eyes shining. Later that night, Maria and Alma sat on the fire escape, watching the city exhale into twilight. Mateo was asleep. The bookstore had given them leftover pastries. Alma held a cup of tea in one hand, her college acceptance letter in the other. "I think I'm going to choose New York," she said. Maria nodded. "I'll miss you. I'll call every day." Maria chuckled. "You'll forget. Maybe. But not the big stuff." Maria reached for her hand. "Then I've done my job." A beat of quiet passed, then Alma asked, "Do you ever think about him?" Maria knew who she meant, the judge. "Sometimes," she said. Not with anger. Just wonder. About what made him look away that day. And what made him look again. And if he hadn't? Maria looked out over the city. The lights. The hum. The life. "Then I would have kept speaking until someone did." Downstairs, her manuscript sat on a small desk near the window, pages marked with tabs and notes. She was already working on a second book, not a memoir this time, but a novel inspired by the women she'd met in shelters, in courtrooms, in waiting rooms across the country. She would change the names, but not the truths, because the real story, she had learned, wasn't just about being believed. It was about becoming impossible to ignore.